Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie, and you might recognize the studio behind me. I'm at the Arts Castle. Today we're going to be making paper clay. Now the reason that we're making paper clay is because it's just made out of things that are going to be really easy for you to find at home. So you don't have to worry about leaving the house or ordering things. And then if you stick around for the next couple videos, we are going to be making some different projects with the paper clay that we make today. So the ingredients are really simple. You're going to need shredded paper. So this, since I'm in the office, I was able to use my paper shredder. If you have one, that's great. Go ahead and use it. They're going to get it in really small pieces for you. If not, just use scissors. And if you don't have, scrap paper or anything like that, you can cut up newspaper, anything that's not a glossy paper. So any kind of flat paper is perfect. And then we have a pitcher of very warm water. Now you want to get this as warm as you can safely get it. So if your parents can help you, go ahead and use some hot water from like a tea kettle that you've heated up on the stove. If you want to try to make it yourself, just use water as hot as you can get it safely from the sink. Then we're going to need a little bit of normal everyday table salt. So the table salt is used as almost like a disinfectant inside of the clay. So if you don't use the salt, you can get some bacteria and things like that that grow in there, and it can make your clay stink over time. So go ahead and have a little bit of salt ready. And then the last ingredient is just normal everyday table flour. So this is going to be our thickening agent for the clay. So again, you're going to need shredded paper, a pitcher of hot water as hot as you could safely get it, make sure you're careful, a little bit of table salt, and then as much flour as it takes to thicken it up. It's going to be probably about 3 parts of the paper pulp to 1 part of the flour. So the first step is super easy. All that we're going to do is we're going to pour this hot water over our shredded paper. So what the hot water does is it softens up the paper, so it's easier for us to like mash it into a pulp later. And what we're going to use for that is one other thing that your parents are going to have to help you with. So I'm using a stick blender. So make some fun shredding noises. We're going to use this to kind of mash it up and make it into a pulp. Make sure your parents help you with this part. You can also use a regular countertop style blender if you have that instead. Just either way, make sure your parents make that part safe for you. We'll get back to that in a second. So I have my water cool enough that I can stick my hands in it and it's not going to burn me. Now, if you have the boiling water, get yourself a spoon for this part to help you mix it in. But I am just going to push this paper down in the water just to make sure that I have enough water in there to cover it. And then all that you have to do is just let this sit overnight. We're not going to do anything else to this until tomorrow. So set it in a safe place, and then I'm going to pull over a bowl that I already made from yesterday. All right, so here is the mash that I started to make yesterday. And you can see the colors have changed a little bit. It's not quite as vibrant. The orange is kind of bled out because it sat in the water overnight, and that's okay. The color of your clay at this point doesn't matter because on both the projects that we're doing this week, we're going to paint it after you're done anyway. So don't worry if it's a color that you think isn't going to mix perfectly with whatever you're making. After these dry out, which is the other great part about paper clay, so you only just have to let them sit in the air to dry. You don't need an oven, you don't need a kiln or anything like this. This is going to be an air dry clay. So after it's air dried, we're going to paint these. But you can see what the water's done to it. It's just made it really nice and soft. It's easy to tear, and it's going to be really nice for us to use our stick blender or your regular blender, whichever kind you're using. Now I have left a little bit of water at the top of this. If you can see that, there's probably about 1 inch of water sitting on the top, and that is to make it easier to blend. So imagine if you're making a smoothie and you only put, strawberries in there. It would take a long time to blend it, but if you pour in some milk or something like that, it'll start to blend right away. So that's what the water's doing in this. So this is the part you're going to grab your parents to help you out with. So make sure you have it in a bowl. Like this is a stainless steel bowl that the stick blender can be used in, and it'll still be safe. Don't use like a thin plastic bowl or anything like that. And you want it to be a little bit deep, because if you don't get it to be a deep bowl, it's going to splash a little bit of water up on you. It's not toxic or anything like that, but you might get a little bit wet. All right, so the next part might be a little bit loud, but what I'm going to be doing is just mashing this paper up, and we're going to make what you call a pulp out of the paper that we are going to turn into the clay in a little bit. So here we go. And you can see already it's starting to change texture a little bit. We're getting this kind of pulpy bits, just like what it sounds like on top where the water has mixed in really well. So here we go. We're going to keep it. And if I can make a suggestion on this, make sure that your blender has stopped blending before you pull it out of this, because that'll really throw a bunch on you. So you're going to push it down, blend, wait till it stops, and then lift it again. I'm going to stop for just a second to pull some of this off the side. Now, remember, anytime that you set this blender to the side, you don't want to touch it while it's plugged in, so be careful. But there's a little bit of paper that's still stuck to the edges in here, so I'm going to pull that off and kind of mix it back in with what we've got here. But we're getting pretty close. Basically, you're going to blend this until you can't see any of those individual colors anymore. You know, we had some orange strips and some white and some blue in there. You're going to blend this until it's all just this great color green that we're getting, because if you remember your color theory, if you mix blue with yellow, you get green. So that's what color our clay is going to be. If you used all white paper, then it would just be all white. All right, we're going to finish this up real quick. All right, that is pretty good. So I am going to set my stick blender to the side. I'm going to unplug it for safety too, just to be on the safe side. You can see I've got a little bit of this pulp on me, but if you do, it's okay, because when it dries, it just brushes right off. Because right now, this is literally just paper and water. There's no glue to it to make it a clay yet. So I'm going to set this to the side, and I'm going to bring up a separate bowl, right? So what we're going to do now is squeeze the water out of this mix. So it's pretty wet right now, but if you just put it between your hands and give it a squeeze, you're going to start to get something the consistency of this, because as you squeeze the water out of it, it becomes a little bit more clay-like. All right? I'm going to do these little balls of these here once I've made them. So just keep squeezing this water out. We're getting a pretty good amount of it out, which is excellent. And you can see how much smaller the balls of it get once you're squeezing the water out. And we're getting a pretty decent amount of water, so that's really good. Let's do one more of these, maybe two, and then we'll start mixing the other ingredients into it. Because right now, it's just the paper and it's just the water. And we're gonna add in the salt and the flour here in a second. Let's do one more. And you know what, guys? This is also a nice eco-friendly thing. We're basically recycling right now, so that's great. Especially if you're using scrap papers or things like that that you would have thrown away. It's a great way to recycle. Okay, so I'm going to pour this water back in here because I want to use this bowl. I'm going to set this part to the side now, and I'm going to put my chunks of the pretty dried clay, well, pre-clay. It's a pulp right now. They call it a paper pulp or paper mash. And I'm going to, just like this, so I can make it a little bit shredded. It's still got some moisture in it, but not too much. Now, the first thing we're going to do is sprinkle our salt on top of this, because you really want to make sure that that gets in every little bit. And then you're going to kind of knead it almost like cookie dough to get that salt worked throughout all the little pieces. All right. And now we're just going to start sprinkling in the flour. Since we didn't measure this out, there's no strict measurements on this. You just want to do it slowly to make sure that you don't want to add too much. But basically, I put this much in, and I'm going to start working this into it just like we did with the salt. And eventually, as we do this, it's going to start to make the consistency of like a Play-Doh almost, and that's what we want. little bit more. And again, nice and slow so you don't get any big chunks of flour and so you don't get too much flour. Now, if you do think that you got too much flour in it, if it's crumbly or really dry, if you have more of the paper mash, just add a little bit of that in. Or if you have used all your paper mash, you can just add a little extra water back in there too. So what we're starting to get is something that'll hold its shape, and that's what we're looking for. I am still going to add just a tiny bit more flour into mine, but I think this will do it. And then once you get the last bit of your flour worked into it, we're going to bring it onto the table, and we're going to make sure that we knead all that flour into it, just like you would a cookie dough, right? So pretend that you're making cookies, but you're really making clay. And again, this clay is great because you really don't have to oven bake it or put it in a kiln or anything. This will air dry, and once it's air dried, we can paint it and we can decorate it. You can glue little bits to it, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing for the next 2 classes. So stay posted for those. And what I'm looking for as I'm doing this is just to make sure that all the flour's mixed in. I don't see any big kind of gluey chunks of the flour standing out in there. But what we have now is a ball of clay that you can mold things out of. So it holds its shape, it's nice and stiff. And this, since we put the salt into it, will hold for a few weeks. And so I'm going to go ahead and store this in a Ziploc bag. And then stay tuned, and we're going to make 2 different crafts out of the paper clay that you made today. Thank you for joining us. We are back, and we are going to be using the paper clay that we made in last time's class to make a couple projects. So here is what you're going to need for today. We have some varied colors of acrylic paint. You want to make sure that you get a paint that is not going to be toxic for you, that your parents say that is okay to use. We've got a couple sizes of brushes, a cup of water, and then I've got a hot glue gun because I like to use hot glue guns, but if you don't have one of those, or if you don't have a parent that can help you, go ahead and just use Elmer's glue or things like that as well. Then we have our paper clay that we made last time. I have a rolling pin, a square of cardboard that we're going to use to make the shape of a book, and then my coffee. Coffee is crucial for me right now because it is the AM. So what we're going to be making today is dragon eggs out of paper clay. And then we're also going to be making a book that has a secret hiding spot on the inside. So let's do the dragon egg first. I've already done a little bit of paint on this one, but we can come back to that. And this is one that I made last night that hasn't been painted yet. So this is what we're going to be going for. We're going to use an egg, just a regular Easter egg, and then I've got some little decorative bits, and that can be anything that you've got around the house. But we're going to shape the clay around the egg. We're going to make some little ridges to make it look like something that a dragon might have laid. And then we're going to press all of these little bits into it to make it feel really special. Now, some of those might fall out. Like as the clay dries, it gets a little bit smaller, right? But you see the indent of the heart there? Well, I know that that's just going to go right back in there. And so that's why I have a glue gun. And that's how everything's going to work there. All right, so first things first, I've got an egg shape. Now, this opens. So if you wanted to make your egg able to be opened, you could still do that. Just make sure that you don't put clay past the seam where it closes back together, right? So all you do is, I'm going to grab a big chunk of my paper clay, and we want to make sure that we are making this thick enough on the egg that, there we go, camera's a little bit better there. Sorry, I'm playing cameraman and artist today. So you want to make sure the clay is thick enough on the egg that it's easy to press things into it, because it has to have a depth, right, that the little bits and special pieces that you add to tell your story can soak into. So, you know, if it's too shallow, they won't be able to stick. So you want to make sure that it's deep enough that you can push those in so they stay. And that's perfect. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit more to this side. And then as you're forming this, just, you know, think about the shape of an egg. So the bottom is going to be a little bit more rounded. So I'm going to tap that a little bit to get that rounded. And then I'm going to push up so the top of it gets that kind of cone shape that an egg has, right? Now, you can use your imagination too. If you think that dragon eggs would be a different shape than this, you can absolutely do something creative with it beyond just the shape of an egg. But I think I'm just going to make mine a normal shape of an egg. All right, so there we go. That's a pretty nice egg. Now I'm going to take a little bit more of this clay. And remember, this is the paper clay that we made last time. If you didn't make the paper clay, though, you could still make these out of Play-Doh, or if you have modeling clay or things like that. The great thing about the paper clay is that we don't have to bake it in any way. You know, this egg is pretty rock hard, and that's just from air drying. That fell off, and that's okay. We're going to fix that with the hot glue gun. That's part of today's lesson. All right, so I am going to just start pressing these ridges on here, and it's okay if they get a little crumbly. You can just press them back together. So, see that? So we're adding just a fun ridge to this to make it interesting. Now on the seam, I'm going to go and I'm just going to press that into the first layer of clay with my finger. And what that does is it seals the two together. So that piece is going to stay on as it dries, because you want to make sure that it does that, right? You want to keep your ridge after you've built it. And then I'm going to pinch this with my fingertips to get the top to seem almost a little sharp, you know, to give it a really fun shape. And then I think I'm going to do one more on the other side. So easiest way that I've found is just to kind of pinch it out and then give it a little roll. I know paper clay is a little bit crumblier than other clays, isn't it? Because, you know, you've got the fibers of the paper in there. Here, I'm going to go the opposite direction on this one. So I'm pressing down, making a fun shape, and then I'm going to make sure, remember what we said, we're going to go through and we're going to take our fingertips and kind of seal that ridge to the egg. That way we know it's going to stay on there when you dry it, right? We can give it a pinch to get that fun ridge shape again. That's pretty cool, isn't it? It's feeling very dragon-like to me. So next step is, I'm going to take some of these fun bits and pieces that I've got in here. I've got marbles. Those are pretty cool. I've got these just glass beads that I think are super fun. And I'm just going to start pressing those into this clay. And, you know, you might mush the shape of your egg a little bit as you're pressing these in here. That's okay. We're going to fix that at the end. So you can literally just put these anywhere that you like in here. Maybe sink a big one at the top and bottom. One there. So I've got these little birds. Maybe I'm going to put a couple of these birds in here just for fun. All right, I'm going around to the back. Again, I've got more of these glass beads. I've got some marbles. I've got some little hearts. And these could be anything that you find around your house, right? Anything that you think would be fun to put in these. All right. Put a little seashell in there too. That's pretty neat. Oop. And like I said, it's okay if these fall out a little bit, because we are definitely going to have to restick some of these after it's dried anyway. All right, so now that I've got my little bits and pieces, I'm going to go around and make sure that they're pressed really well into that clay, that they've got a nice deep impression. And then if I crushed any of my little rim of my egg, I'm going to fix that as I'm going to. Now, here's an important part once you've got this the way that you like it. I'm going to set it with this other one that I made yesterday. And so you can see the drying process. It's not quite dry yet. Really, you're going to want to give this about 3 days sitting to get it fully dry before you paint it. So after you do all your work on this, just set it to the side for a couple days, and it's going to turn a much lighter green. You see where that bead fell off, how light that green is compared to these? It'll turn a lot lighter when it's dry, and it'll be really lightweight too. So I'm going to find a spot on this where I have, I think that's a good spot, where I have 3 beads sticking up. And I'm going to set it on those beads, right? And what that does is it keeps it from mushing the egg. So it's setting on the beads instead of the actual clay. And now I am just going to set that to the side. I'm going to wait 3 days and I'm going to let that dry. Now, here's the fun part. I've already done 1 layer of paint on this. And while we are preparing to paint again, I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun because I want to make sure that I glue back in all these little fun bits and pieces. I'm going to step to the other side of the table for a second so I can plug this in. And you never want to plug in a hot glue gun until you're almost ready for it because they get very hot, and make sure that you have your parents help you with that part too, okay? All right, so I am back to this side of the table. I've got my hot glue gun warming up. You want to make sure that you let that warm up in a space that's going to be safe for it. Never set it on anything that's flammable or things like that. Make sure that it's a couple inches away from other objects just to be safe. And then you never touch the metal portion because that part gets really hot. All right. So in the meantime, let's start thinking about our colors. I've got my water here. You always want to have a little bit of water in place so you can soak your brushes in it. An important part of taking care of brushes is making sure that the paint never dries in them. So you always want to have some water standing by. I already did a layer of red on this egg. So I think that I'm going to do some blue next. So I am going to put some blue paint into here. And honestly, it doesn't take a whole lot. Just give yourself a little bit. You never want to put out more paint than you think that you're going to be able to use, because especially in containers like this, you can't get it back in and you don't want to waste it. So we've got that. Let's see if our hot glue gun has heated up enough. I just put a fresh glue stick in there. Now, how you'll know if it's heated up is if glue comes out. So yeah, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to put some hot glue in there. And again, if you don't have hot glue, just use Elmer's or something like that. And then I am just going to stick that bead that fell off back on there. And that's why you don't have to worry if some of these fall off, because you just glue them back in. So I can tell that that's the heart shape. I'm going to take my heart. I'm going to glue that back in. And then I know I have 2 little spots open here where these little round beads fell out of. So I am going to glue those guys back in as well. There we go. I think I'll do the pink one on this side, do the red one on this side. They're the same size, so it didn't really matter. All right, so that's all the pieces that fell off. The rest of them feel like they're sticking in there pretty well. Give it a tap, see if anything else falls off. And if not, I think we're okay to go ahead and paint this guy. So I'm going to take a brush, and what I might do is maybe I want a little bit of this red to poke through. Maybe I just want to do a little bit of the blue, you know, maybe the red poking through and some textured spots will help it look almost scale-like. I think that could be pretty neat if we can pull that off. If you get a little bit on a bead, it's okay. They're plastic or glass, so you can just wipe it right off. Now, if you're worried about getting glue on your beads, you can always wait to put the beads on, like purposely take your beads out of those holes and let them sit to the side to dry, and then put them back in after you've painted everything, and that's totally fine too. See this texture that we're getting on the paint by using almost kind of not a lot of paint. You want to use almost like a dry brush, and that way little bits and pieces of that red still show through, and it gives you the impression of maybe some scales. I think it's pretty neat. And remember, if you did the style that's that you can open, make sure that when it dries, the portions are really separated so that they don't stick together, because you want to make sure that you can still open it when you're ready to. The book, we're definitely going to do that for them. All right, so again, remember, put your brush into your water cup. You want to make sure that you don't ruin any of your brushes. And look at that, we've got this dragon egg that's just magical and lovely. You could set it in windows, you could put it in potted plants. Like I said, they're pretty hard, so really you could set it on a table. It could be a paperweight. You could do all kinds of things with it. All right, so that completes your dragon eggs. I'm gonna set these items to the side now. I'm gonna walk around and unplug my glue stick now because I don't need a glue gun for the next part. Always make sure that you unplug these guys and set them somewhere safe to dry. I've lost my marbles. I'm spilling my marbles. All right, so I'm gonna make some space and we're gonna talk about the book, all right? So for the book, we're gonna use a rolling pin. We've just got a normal butter knife here. And then you need a surface that you can roll these out on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna roll pieces about this thick, right? This is our book cover. And then we're gonna put those together so it looks like pages on the side. And then after we've got them all put together, we're gonna cut a section out of the middle. We're gonna make sure that we have an edge that the page can kind of slip back underneath. And then that is gonna give you your hidden area in there where you can keep things that are specialty. Now I put a KH on the top of mine. We're gonna paint this too because those are my initials. But you could also press a bunch of things into it. You could put your glass or your beads or anything like that that we've used previously. You could absolutely put those into the book as well. I think I'm gonna mostly paint mine, so I didn't do that. But let's get started. First things first, you're gonna need a surface that you feel comfortable setting these sheets onto to dry. I like to do something like the holes are really nice in this because it lets air through and it's gonna help you dry faster. That book might take maybe 4 or 5 days to dry because it's thicker than the egg, because you have to think with the egg, they look really bulky, but there's not really that much clay on them, right? You know, because we put it around another shape. So with the book, it's pretty thick. It's gonna take a couple extra days to dry. And then you're gonna need a place where you can roll your clay out, right? So I'm gonna use the same clay that we used for the eggs. And I'm gonna give myself enough to be able to roll out, right? All right, so the shape that I'm aiming for is this. And we're gonna set this on top to cut our clay out. So I'm gonna take my rolling pin. And I'm gonna gently just start rolling this shape out. You wanna leave it thick enough that you're able to move it. And a slick surface is better. I might have a little bit of trouble pulling this off of the wood table that I'm on. So we'll have to see on that because it's absorbent. If you have a surface that is less absorbent, that would be better. But what we're gonna do is we're just gonna come along, we're gonna cut off the extra bits on the end because we'll keep using those. And then we're gonna be left with this square shape. Now I'm gonna real gently work it up from the back because I don't wanna rip this. And like I said, if you can use a surface that this sticks less to, that'll help you out. All right, there we go. I'm just gonna set this here. Now, I did get a little bit of ripping, so we're just gonna fix that real quick before we move on. And it's okay if that happens. Paper clay is not as easy to use as some of the store-bought clays that you might get. You know, it's really nice because you can make it at home, but it is a little bit tougher to work with than some things. All right, so there we go. So we are gonna keep doing that until we have a few layers built up, because you want to be able to have enough layers to cut out the middle, right? So you have to have a thickness built up there. And if a little piece peels off, just stick it back down. It's okay. This doesn't have to be exactly perfect. All right, so we're off some edges. And again, just a butter knife will do it. Doesn't have to be a really sharp knife because this clay separates really easily. So no need to get anything real sharp. Just use a blunt butter knife and that's fine. Add a little more back in there. Okay, so same thing, just real gently. We're going to work this off of the table and onto here. And a fun thing that you'll start seeing as you're layering these, the edge, since it's like a shredded paper, will start to look like the edge of a book. It'll look like a multi-layered edge. All right, and this is going to be our last layer on this one. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? These are a little bit uneven, so, and I need a little bit more clay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten this book a little bit. Let's see, we'll cut off that bottom too. We'll make more of a square book for this one because I need a little bit more clay because I want my top layer to be a really, really thick layer. What do you think? We'll make a pocket-sized book this time. There we go. This will give me enough clay to do a really nice thick top, and that's important in this part. All right, so here we go. We're going to do this one more time. This one, we want to be a little bit thicker. And I'm kind of going to have to guess a little bit, since now we don't have a book form, right, that fits with this. So let's see, probably right about to there. And then measure with my fingers, about there, about right. And again, we're just going to come peel this off of the back. Perfect. Look at that. So the thickness is about that thick, so we're going to have some space to work with. And then I'm going to take what I have left here. And you know, books have a spine on the ends, right? So we're going to make one of those real quick. So look at that. We're going to use all of our clay. That's excellent. So we're going to do a little build out here that'll look like the spine of a book. But you want to make sure that this section you can still remove, all right? So I'm going to pull that off again and set it to the side. And then I'm going to take my butter knife and I'm going to cut out a section big enough to hold whatever secret thing I want to put in there. And then I am just going to pull up just the middle layers, right? Because you still want to have a bottom to your book. So we've still got the base in there. We've got the sides. And then we have this little bits that we've cut out there that you can put something special to you inside of. So now that I have a little bit of clay that we've taken from the inside, this is where you could add your initials. So maybe I'm going to add a big K to this one. My first name is Katie. There we go. Now, and another important thing, I am going to put a layer, this is just the plastic bag that I had my clay stored in. I'm going to put that in between these as they dry, okay? And that is so, as they dry, they don't stick together. You don't want them to stick together because you want the lid of your box to be able to come off, right? So we're going to put that in there so that part doesn't stick together. And then we're going to set that to the side and let that dry for, again, maybe even 4 or 5 days. You'll know when it's dry because the color, here you can see the difference. See how much lighter this color is once it's dry, and it's hard. So you know that you've got a solid clay there. All right, so I'm going to set this to the side again. clean up my little bits of clay that I've got here. And then we're gonna bring back our finished dry book, right? So first things first with this, I am going to get white paint first because I want to paint the pages white. And this is why, again, it didn't matter what color of paper that you use to make your clay with, because at the end of the day, we're gonna paint it anyway. I'm gonna get a nice big brush and I'm just gonna start painting everywhere white that would be a book page. And if you don't want to paint the inside, maybe you want to be able to see the clay there. That's okay, you can do that too. This is a little bit up to interpretation. It's how you think it should look, because this is telling your story, so you get to decide how you think this should look. And because of the texture of the paper clay, it might take a little bit more paint than you'd think that you would need to get it to really get into all those little nooks of the clay, and that's okay. I think I am going to leave the inside of mine just that bare clay color so I can tell what it used to be. All right, now I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to turn it because I want to paint the edges white too, because these would be book pages. I'm going to try to not paint the very, very bottom, because the very, very bottom would be the book cover, right? So you're going to have a layer at the bottom that's going to be the same color as the top. And this gives me a nice place to grab too, having that middle portion not covered in paint yet. All right, so we're going to keep painting. We're going to leave a little edge at the bottom because that is going to be our book cover. So we'll get to decide what color we want to make that too. All right, flip it around here. And again, we're leaving the very, very bottom of it without any white paint. We've got to decide what color we want that to be. All right, so our pages are white. Little gaps there, but that's okay. White on the sides. I'm gonna rinse my brush. Remember, you always keep your brushes rinsed. And then I think, since I've already got blue out, maybe I'll just do a little bit more blue and our book cover will be blue. That way I don't waste that paint that I already had out. But you can do this any color that you want. Kind of want to use this broad brush again, so I'm going to dry that off on a paper towel. Now I'm going to dip into my blue paint. I'm going to do my spine first. And you know, if you wanted to make this a certain book, you could write the name of your favorite book on the side of here. You could paint it on with paint. You could use a marker. I'm just going to make sure I get all this painted. I've been doing a lot of audiobooks through the library recently. You know, since we weren't able to get into the library, I've been spending a lot of time on their reading app called Hoopla. And I've really been enjoying the book options that they've had on Hoopla. It was really nice to be able to read while we were stuck inside. Make sure you get the side, your book too. And now this is going to be a little detail work because we're just going to paint just that bottom edge. It's better if you would let this dry, the white dry, before you start doing the blue, because they might mix a little bit. But since we're filming and we're on a little bit of a time crunch, I'm going to go ahead and just paint it all at the same time. But I would recommend letting it dry in between your paint colors if you've got time. Now, I read a lot of mystery books, and Hoopla has some really nice mystery books on there, so it made it a little bit more enjoyable to be spending some time at home. And don't forget this side of your binding too. All right, so we've got a blue spine, we've got our white pages. I'm gonna set that down, and I would paint the very, very bottom of it too. Again, I'm not gonna do it today because, you know, we're trying to do this in a certain amount of time. But if I were you, I would flip your book over and paint it that other side, whatever color you chose as well. And make sure that you have some newspaper or something like that out that you can set these on so you don't get paint on your table. I did not do that in this case because these are art tables and they tend to get a lot of paint on them anyway, and I'm going to come through and clean it really well afterwards. But at home, I would recommend making sure that you cover all your workspaces in newspaper or paper towels or something that it's okay if it gets a little bit of paint on. Especially if you're using acrylic, because, you know, acrylic is permanent once it dries. If you're using tempera paint, a lot of that should come off with soap and water. But, you know, sometimes it does leave a little bit of dye behind too. So better safe than sorry, and put down some newspaper. Letters are going to be the hardest part to paint around because they've got a lot of texture. But I think we can get it. And you can see I have my thumb hold there. I'm going to switch it. I'm going to lay it flat on my hand so I can get to that part that my thumb has been staying clean in. Try to get all those little rough edges. I know the rough edges are tough, but if you can paint them, they'll look a little bit better. Now I've still got a little bit of white in my tray, so I'm going to come through and just paint the initials. There we go. So that stands out a little bit more. So this is the cover for our book. Now you would let these dry fully. I'm going to just go ahead and place mine on there since, again, we're in a little bit of a time crunch. But now you have a paper clay book. And I think it really looks like a book, doesn't it? I think we've done a really great job on how that looks. That has a secret spot that you can hide things that are important for you. Keep them safe. Maybe it's jewelry, maybe it's, you know, a bookmark or something that you really love like that. But now you have a little box that you can keep things important to you safe in. I hope that you enjoyed our paper clay projects that we've done today. Dragon eggs, go back into the viewing field now that we've gotten finished painting. So we've got our dragon eggs, we've got our book, and all of this is made out of simple paper clay that you can make at home. Please visit the library whenever you're able to again, and we would love to see you at the Arts Castle as well. And I hope that everybody has a great rest of your summer. Have a good day.